So welcome back. I'm gonna do some more detail on the facial features in this part. It's looking very flat right now, so it definitely needs more detail, especially in the nose and the mouth, and hey, pretty much everything else. My underlying paint is still pretty wet, so I'm gonna try and add in some pretty dark paint, because like I said before, it tends to mix on the surface. And this is, again, just part of exploring a material that I'm honestly not yet comfortable with. And if this were acrylics or basically any other medium, I would layer darker values over what I have, and I would tend to build them up to be on the safe side, to see where I need to make corrections. And I get a feeling right now with this oil paint that is not going to work. That is going to take forever. And because, again, it mixes when you put it on, when it's still wet, you run the risk of, putting on so much paint and still not achieving the contrast that you want, or that I want. So I'm painting this on a loose sheet of paper. I don't generally like sketchbooks or like blocks of paper that are bound together when I paint, whether it's acrylics or oil, because they do need to dry, even acrylics, so you need to leave them open. And I had an acrylic paper, paper suitable for acrylics in a notebook style thingy. And what I noticed is when you close it and you store it and then you open it again, even dry acrylic is going to stick to the other page, right? So you could use like lining paper or something like that to put in between, but you can't just close it and be done with it. So I stopped painting in journals and notebooks. So I'm doing this on a loose, is that how you call it? Just a single sheet of paper. And then I store them in a folder or a box or whatever. And what I sometimes do with these experiments is that I write down certain things that I came across, like notes. And I put those notes in like a plastic folder, like a holder, so it doesn't come into contact with the paint. And then I put that in there, right? So I got my notes and I got my sketch, demo, experiment, whatever. Because it's really easy to think that you're going to remember what you're going to do differently next time, and then next time you're going to forget that. Or at least I forget it. I don't know about you. But I tend to be, a little forgetful. And especially when things are not second nature yet, certain ways of working, it can really help to write things down. You can even do that like in a note on your phone. Just take a picture of the work and then put a note in your phone. I'm trying to get the shape of the nose right, and at the same time sort of blend it into the shadow that is underneath there. And it's very, very fiddly. It's very fiddly. Because when you touch that lighter paint, then you drag that paint back into the darker area that you just painted. And it really, in that respect, reminds me a little bit of watercolor, where you really need to watch your brush direction. Right? So with watercolor, you put color down, and when you start in a certain place and you end up in a certain place with a stroke, when you lift your brush in watercolor, that is where the most paint is going to sit, at the end of your stroke, right? So that is that watching the direction, watching where you start and you end. You don't have that with acrylic, and you don't have that with pastel or any dry medium. But with oil paint, you also, I feel like you need to watch where you start and where you end. I do like how this looks though. I like the way this is working, because I think a lot of people have trouble with the nose, or at least it's quite a bit of work, because it's a complicated shape that creates a lot of different values. And I find it easy with this paint that you can, again, like I said before, sort of push it around, move it around. I think the key sometimes here is that you don't necessarily have to put on more paint to establish a value. Sometimes it's a matter of pushing the paint that is already on there in a different direction or in a different shape. So I'm gonna try and do the same kind of fiddly movements in the mouth area, where I already have, as you can see, quite a bit of paint on. So I'm just gonna go ahead and try to make those shapes more accurate and blend them in a little bit. And I do, you can't see that because I'm not filming my palette, that would result in a very, very long video series. But I do obviously pick up new paint, I pick up new values, and I sometimes wipe my brush on an old piece of cloth, so you don't get that buildup of paint in your brush, and especially in the top part, you know, where it tends to collect. And you can actually wipe that off pretty hard, yeah. So with any other water-soluble paint, I would just wash it, but I don't want to get my brush too wet with this paint, so I just wipe it dry on a piece of cloth. Just a little bit of change on that eyelid, because I can't leave it alone. I have a whole other eye to do still. Yeah, really just barely touching it. Maybe I should just stop touching it and just leave it leave it alone. I find that really difficult when you try something that you haven't done before. I had the same thing when I started with acrylics. It's just because you're uncomfortable with it. It's really hard to determine like a plan or like a process where you think to yourself, okay, now I'm going to do this, and I'm going to leave it alone, and I'm going to continue with that, and then I'm going to come back and finish this or that in that way, right? That planning I'm starting to realize that level of planning comes from experience and a certain amount of confidence in the materials that you're using, because you subconsciously create an automated process almost. And sometimes it can feel, when you're painting, when you're doing art, that you start from scratch every time, or you start fresh, because every artwork you create is unique, and maybe it comes from a different feeling or different, whatever the reason is you make art. But there are some movements and there are some parts of the process that do get automated. You don't always realize that, but you don't have to think so much anymore about the speed of drying, or the brushes you're going to use, or the movements you're going to make, or even the medium you're going to add or not add. And that becomes almost like a second nature, and that gives you more space in your head to think about other things. And then when you go back and you try something new, like this, for me, I feel like all my brain space, if you will, all my energy is being used for thinking about every step I do. Like, what am I doing? What am I going to do? And what is this stroke and what is this addition going to mean for my painting? So it's a very different way for me now of working. So I'm just moving around these values a little bit, trying to see if I want certain areas darker or lighter. I do tend to, I usually do that with other mediums as well, but I tend to create a pretty flat base. Flat as in value-wise, right? So with very low contrast. And then I, at the end, tend to put in the darker shadows and the lighter highlights. I'm not really sure if that is even a proper way to go about things. It's just that I notice I tend to do that. Right, I'm just gonna try and get that other eye to the same level. Otherwise, I'm gonna be fiddling around with that one side of the face forever. This eye, from what I remember from the reference photo, again, I'm not really looking at it, is that the eyelid sits a little bit lower. So I'm gonna try and do that just because I think it's a nice feature. And yeah, bring something unique to the face. It's not a very, I just took a quick look on my tablet at the photo. It's not a photo with very strong highlights in the eyes. Sometimes we tend to put exactly the same highlight in both eyes. That is usually more like a studio lighting. And if you look at outdoor pictures, you can see sometimes that the highlight in one eye is different than in the other, or sometimes even there is a highlight in one eye and not in the other, right? And if you feel like you're always doing the same highlights in the eyes, try and study a couple of reference photos to see what the variety can be in different photos. It's actually quite interesting to take a closer look at that, because I sometimes have a tendency to just, drop the highlight in and be done with it. And it can give your work sometimes a generic look. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that whenever you get the feeling that you're doing the same thing every time, then maybe you want to take a look at how highlights in outdoor or like nature environments work. The other thing I did focus on a couple of years ago was the actual shape and color of highlights, because again, I think at first you just tend to drop in a white dot and be done with it, and it can give a very sort of cartoony look, very graphic look. It can be interesting because, right now we have very high resolution photos. If you go to a reference photo website like Unsplash, you can download very high resolution, and you can actually take a very close look at the color and shape of highlights in the eye. And so if you're interested in that, yeah, go take a look, because it can really add, like this extra touch to your face. Maybe in the future we can do a couple of videos on, painting different parts of the face, just focusing on that only. I do it a lot in my spare time or when I practice, but I don't tend to record that because I get a little stressed when I'm recording. But yeah, maybe you guys would like that. Just, the standard paint an eye, paint a nose, etc., etc. Because it's less overwhelming. It's why when I practice or when when I practice, I tend to focus on just one part of the face, because painting an entire face is a lot of work, right? So yeah, still fiddling around with that eye. I don't really feel like I'm in a terribly good flow at the moment. Just a lot of fiddling. I was thinking about cutting this out of the video, editing it out. Yeah, this would not make a very great lesson, but I decided at some point it was going to be demo, so I kind of wanted to show the struggle. Yeah, just let me know, what you think. because I'm watching this while I do the voiceover, and I get frustrated just looking at it again, to be honest. And like I said before, I do understand, and I do realize that it takes practice and it takes experience to gain a little bit of confidence. But yeah, it's very tempting to just drop it and say, I'm just gonna go back to acrylics, or I'm gonna go back to open acrylics. So I do get that. I think it's when we talk in student groups, like in my workshop group, I think that's one of the most difficult things to explain to people, that you just really need to go through that really uncomfortable stage. And for me, and I don't know how it works for you, but for me, that can really take the joy out of art. I really do not like being this uncomfortable. I feel like some people are more like driven, or they get motivated by this sense of being uncomfortable or not being able to do something. And I lack that a little bit. But we are going to continue, right? So I'm just going to keep these videos, I guess, as some kind of accountability to keep me working in oils, right? But yeah, next time we're just going to do like a single feature and make this a little bit shorter. Because like I said before, I actually thought that I had this idea in my head that this was going to go a lot faster. And I don't really know why I had that idea. Again, I've probably been watching too many videos of really great and experienced artists who work very quickly with oil paint. And then made the mistake of thinking that, I could do that. I do like how the line between the top lip and the bottom lip, I like how that's looking. That is sometimes in other mediums a very difficult thing for me to get right, because it needs to be tight but not too tight, that line. And I remember when I used to work with graphite pencil, I would just blend that with a paper stump to get a little bit of blending, but not too much. But in acrylic paint, and even in watercolor, it is really difficult to get right. Yeah, so I do like how it looks so far. So we're just gonna keep going, and this is the end almost of this video, and the next video is gonna be the next day. All right, so I'm gonna let this dry for about 18 hours, I think. I'm gonna go check my timestamps on my video, and I'm gonna let you know in the next video how much time has passed and how the paint is feeling the next day. All right, so I will see you in the next video. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you there.